Sit close, my children, and listen well to a tale I have carried in my heart for many seasons. This is a story of a man named Adewale, a wealthy baker who lived in a mansion with golden doors at the edge of our village. On one terrible night, villagers gathered before those sealed doors, listening to strange cries echoing from within. Adewale stood outside, trembling in the darkness, refusing to step across his own threshold. His workers whispered that he was cursed. The elders shook their heads in confusion. But no one truly understood why this rich man, who owned everything, stood outside his own home like a beggar. That night, strange whispers traveled through the windows like ghosts searching for escape. Lightning flashed across the sky, and Adewale muttered words that froze the blood of all who heard them. If only you knew why I cannot enter. Then he collapsed, and silence fell upon the village. I was there that night, my children, watching from the shadows, and I knew then that something wicked had taken root in our land. When dawn broke, Adewale returned to the bustling market as if nothing had happened. The villagers watched in amazement as he moved between the stalls, distributing golden bread to everyone he met. The bread was unlike anything anyone had ever tasted, warm, sweet, and somehow filling the heart with joy. Children ran toward him with open hands. Mothers blessed his name. Old men wept with gratitude. Within weeks, Adewale became the most beloved man in our village. People said the gods had chosen him for greatness. But I noticed something strange that no one else seemed to see. His workers moved about the bakery with fearful eyes. When I asked them where he baked at night, they refused to speak, quickly turning away their faces. One worker, a young boy named Kola, whispered that he had never seen Adewale bake during daylight hours. All the golden bread appeared mysteriously in the oven each morning, still warm, as if conjured by invisible hands. The more bread Adewale gave away, the richer he became. His fortune grew like wild vines, spreading through the village, touching every family. There was a young woman named Ifeananya who worked as a tailor, mending torn clothes for market vendors. While her fingers worked the needle, her eyes worked harder, watching everything around her. She noticed what others did not, that people who ate Adewale's bread walked differently, spoke differently, sometimes even seemed to forget their own names. One morning, she examined a piece of golden bread left on a customer's table. Her heart stopped. Burned into the crust were strange symbols, runes that seemed to dance and shift when she looked at them directly. That night, Ifeananya dreamed of an enormous oven glowing beneath dark water. Inside the oven, faces pressed against the glass, their mouths opening silently. She woke gasping, her clothes soaked with cold sweat. From that moment, quiet suspicion grew in her heart like a seed waiting to bloom. She began following Adewale in secret, watching his movements, noting how he smiled while others suffered. The runes on the bread haunted her thoughts day and night, whispering secrets she could not yet understand. One evening, the village held a great feast to honor Adewale's generosity. Mountains of his golden bread sat on tables, and everyone gathered to celebrate. But Ifeananya watched carefully as Adewale moved through the crowd. When no one was looking, she saw him refuse to eat his own bread. He pushed the plate away as if it contained poison. Then, when he thought no one was watching, he slipped something small into his pocket, a tiny wooden shard, carved with symbols that matched the runes on his bread. Ifeanyanya's breath caught in her throat. She pretended to look away, but her mind was racing. Later that night, a child named Tund who had eaten the bread went missing. His mother searched the village screaming his name into the darkness. The next morning, the villagers organized search parties, but Adewale appeared calm, almost peaceful. He even offered silver coins to anyone who found Tund, as if he knew the child would never be found. An unease began to spread through Ifeanyanya's heart like poison through water. She knew, with a certainty she could not explain, that Adewale held the key to Tund's disappearance. The search continued for days. Villagers walked along the riverbank, calling Tund's name into the wind. But when they drew near to Adewale, he quietly offered them silver and asked them to search elsewhere. His money silenced their questions. Most accepted his coins and stopped looking. Only a few continued searching near the river. Then, on the morning of the 5th day, a piece of soggy bread floated downstream. Ifeananya spotted it and pulled it from the water. The bread was marked with the same runes she had seen on Adewale's creations. Her hands trembled as she showed it to the others. But something strange happened. Instead of blaming Adewale, the villagers blamed the river spirits. They said the river was angry and had taken Tund as punishment for some forgotten crime. Adewale stood nearby, nodding solemnly, speaking of curses and angry gods. The mother of Tund wept, and instead of seeking justice, she brought offerings to the river. Panic mixed with denial filled the village. People wanted to believe the easy answer rather than face the truth standing before them. Ifeananya watched in frustration as the village turned away from what their hearts already knew. That night, Ifeananya fell into a deep sleep troubled by fear. Her dream was vivid and terrifying. She saw bread loaves floating like boats on an ocean of fire. They burned but did not crumble. A voice, ancient and hollow, spoke directly into her mind, "Break not what seals you." The words echoed endlessly. Then she saw the wooden shard, glowing red like an ember, pulsing with a heartbeat that was not her own. Symbols surrounded it, spinning faster and faster. When Ifeananya woke, her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She stumbled to her worktable where she mended clothes. There, carved into the wood by an invisible hand, were the same symbols from her dream. They glowed faintly in the dim light of dawn. Ifeanyanya's fear mixed with determination. She knew then that she was not imagining these things. Something ancient and evil had awakened in their village. Her resolve hardened like clay in the sun. She decided that no matter the cost, she would uncover the truth about Adewale and his cursed bread. Weeks passed, and Adewale's generosity became legendary. The village elders decided to honor him at the annual shrine festival. They invited him to donate bread to the sacred place. Adewale accepted with a humble smile, though Ifeananya noticed his eyes betrayed something darker. On the day of the festival, he walked to the shrine carrying baskets of golden bread. The elders blessed him, calling him a gift from the gods themselves. But when Adewale entered the sacred shrine, something strange occurred. Every bird in the village fell silent. No chirping, no songs, just an unnatural quiet that made everyone's skin crawl. Yet the elders, in their blindness, saw this as a sign of divine approval. Whispers about Ifeananya began spreading through the village. People said she was jealous of Adewale's success. They called her bitter and envious. Some claimed she wanted his wealth for herself. The words stung, but Ifeananya ignored them. She watched as Adewale smiled, accepting praise while the village turned against her. Then came the final sign. A loaf of Adewale's bread that had been left in the shrine crumbled into ash before anyone could eat it. Ifeananya alone understood what this meant. Ifeananya returned to her workspace, her mind troubled and determined. In the ashes left by the crumbled bread, she found something that made her gasp. A small wooden shard, identical to the one Adewale carried, lay hidden in the gray powder. When her fingers touched it, she heard something that chilled her entire body, faint weeping, the sound of a child crying from far away. The shard was warm, pulsing gently against her palm like a living heart. Dread washed over her in waves. She wanted to throw the object away, to burn it and forget it existed. But something held her back. Instead, she wrapped it carefully in cloth and hid it beneath her sleeping mat. That night, a voice whispered to her from the cloth, "Never bring it home." But it was too late. The shard had already marked her as one who knew its secrets. Ifeananya lay awake until dawn, listening to the sound of distant weeping echoing through her hut. She understood then that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She was no longer a simple tailor. She had become something else, a guardian of a terrible truth. The next morning, before the village awakened, Ifeananya made a dangerous decision. She traveled deep into the forest, following a path that few dared to walk. At the heart of the forest stood an ancient shrine, hidden from the world by twisted trees and shadows. There lived Ioka, a priestess known for her connection to the old ways and forgotten magic. Ioka was ancient, her eyes silver with age and wisdom. When Ifyinanya showed her the wooden shard, the priestess's entire body went rigid. Her hands trembled as she touched it with reverence and fear. "This," Ioka whispered, "is the bread seal of Orunmala's pact. I have not seen one in 50 seasons." Revelation mixed with awe filled the air between them. Ioka explained that this shard was used in dark rituals, binding souls to objects. She told Ifyinanya that whoever first ate the bread marked by this seal would have their soul trapped within it forever. The bread would grant wealth to the baker, but at a terrible price. Someone had to be sacrificed, their life force feeding the magic. Ioka warned, "It binds the soul of the first eater. That soul remains trapped, crying out from between worlds." Ifyinanya's blood turned to ice. Armed with this knowledge, Ifyinanya began tracking everyone who had eaten Adewale's bread. She visited homes, asking careful questions, listening to stories. What she discovered terrified her. Everyone who had eaten the bread suffered some form of loss or misfortune. A merchant who had boasted of Adewale's kindness lost his entire fortune overnight. A woman who had praised the bread fell into a sickness that no healer could cure. Children who had eaten it developed strange fevers. An old man simply walked into the forest one day and never returned. Ifyinanya noticed a pattern in the suffering. All the afflicted had eaten bread delivered on the night of the red moon, a rare occurrence when the moon turned crimson in the sky. She documented everything in a hidden journal, writing names and dates with trembling fingers. The determined fear that filled her grew stronger with each discovery. She was building proof, brick by brick, of Adewale's wickedness. Then came the day when Adewale himself appeared at her workshop. He smiled warmly and offered her work at his bakery, a position of honor and trust. Ifyinanya's heart stopped. She smiled back and accepted, knowing she was walking into the lion's den. Ifyinanya began working in Adewale's bakery at dawn each day. The moment she entered the building, she felt it, an unnatural warmth that had nothing to do with the ovens. The air itself seemed alive, watching her, judging her. At the center of the bakery stood a massive clay oven sealed with symbols carved deep into its surface. Adewale kept this oven locked, and he forbade anyone from approaching it. The sealed oven glowed with an eerie light that seemed to pulse from within, as if something inside was breathing. Ifyinanya's curiosity and dread mingled together like oil and water. She wanted to open it, to see what lay inside. Yet she feared what she might find. One afternoon, when Adewale stepped away, she moved toward the oven. Before she could touch it, his hand gripped her wrist with incredible strength. His eyes flickered gold, a color no human eyes should possess. "Never touch this oven," he hissed, his voice no longer warm and kind. "If you value your life, you will forget you ever saw it." His grip tightened until pain shot through her arm. Then he released her, and his eyes returned to their normal brown. He smiled as if nothing had happened, but Ifyinanya understood his true nature had been revealed. That night, unable to sleep, Ifyinanya made a desperate decision. She gathered flour, salt, and water, and secretly baked a small loaf in her hut, following the recipe she had memorized from watching Adewale's notes. As she kneaded the dough, she whispered a prayer to the spirits for protection. The loaf rose in her small oven, and when she removed it, her hands shook. She cut into the warm bread, expecting it to look normal. Instead, a single drop of red liquid, something that looked like blood, fell from the center of the loaf onto her cutting board. Terror seized her completely. She heard a voice, distant and desperate, whisper her name from inside the bread. It was the voice of Tund, the boy who had gone missing. His spirit was trapped, crying out from within the cursed loaf. Ifyinanya dropped the bread as if it had burned her. The loaf crumbled to ash on her floor, and the whispers faded. She understood now with absolute certainty that Adewale was no man at all, he was something ancient and evil, feeding on human souls to sustain his wealth and power. Gathering her courage, Ifeananya went to the village elders and told them everything. She showed them her journal, described the missing children, explained the pattern of misfortune. But the elders laughed at her. They said bread could not curse anyone. They said she was jealous of Adewale's success and had invented lies to destroy him. One elder even suggested she was possessed by evil spirits herself. The village had fallen completely under Adewale's spell. His generosity had blinded them to truth. Meanwhile, Adewale continued his performances of charity, handing out loaves to priests and prominent citizens. The more the village rejected Ifeanyanya's warnings, the more frustrated and alone she became. Despair threatened to overwhelm her. Then Ioka sent word through a traveler, the first victim must be found. Only by freeing the first soul can the curse be broken. Ifeananya knew she had to act alone, without the village's help. She would have to find the source of this curse and destroy it, even if it meant sacrificing herself. Her determination hardened into steel. She was no longer afraid. She was ready for war. Ifeananya traveled back to the forest shrine and begged Ioka for guidance. The priestess told her to burn the wooden shard in river fire under the full moon. This may weaken the curse, Ioka said, but it will not destroy it. Ifeananya followed the instructions precisely. She brought the shard to the river at midnight and built a fire with wood from sacred trees. As the flames consumed the shard, something terrible happened. The river itself began to darken, turning from clear water to thick black liquid. Fish floated to the surface, their eyes wide and lifeless. The water released a smell like rot and death. Ifeananya watched in despair as her first attempt failed. The shard didn't burn away, it reformed beside her bed the next morning, whole and undamaged. The curse was too strong. Adewale's power ran too deep. Ifeanyanya's hope dimmed like a candle in the wind. She sat alone in her hut, wondering if she would ever find a way to stop him. That night, as Ifeananya tried to rest, she heard whispers surrounding her hut. Her door trembled with invisible hands trying to enter. Through her window, she saw shadows moving, shadows that resembled villagers she recognized. They were the missing people, the ones who had eaten Adewale's bread. Their faces were twisted with suffering, their mouths opening and closing silently. Panic gripped her throat. She barricaded her door and hid in the corner of her hut, watching the shadows dance across her walls. Then came a tap on her window. Adewale's face appeared in the moonlight, his expression calm and peaceful, as if he had not transformed into something monstrous. "Stop asking questions," he said softly. "Forget what you have learned. Eat my bread, and you will be happy forever." His voice was hypnotic, almost tempting. But Ifeanyanya's courage held strong. She refused to answer him. After what felt like hours, Adewale disappeared, and the shadows faded. Ifeananya realized then that she was his greatest threat. He could no longer ignore her. The next morning, Ifeananya returned to Ioka with renewed determination. The priestess opened an ancient ledger, its pages yellowed with age. "I have been waiting for this moment," Ioka said, pointing to a name written in faded ink, Ezen. "The first victim," the priestess continued. "Adewale's wife. She was the first to eat the cursed bread 20 years ago." Ifeanyanya's mind reeled. Adewale had sacrificed his own wife to gain wealth and power. Ioka revealed that Ezen's spirit remained trapped within the sealed mansion, unable to find peace. "Her soul cries out still," Ioka whispered, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone brave enough to free her. Ifeananya made her decision in that moment. She would enter the mansion, the very place where Adewale refused to go. She would face his wife's ghost and find a way to break the curse from its source. The sorrow and awe she felt for Ezen strengthened her resolve. She was no longer fighting just for the village. She was fighting to free a woman who had been betrayed by the man she loved. Under cover of darkness, Ifeananya crept into Adewale's mansion through a window he had left unguarded. Inside, the air was thick and cold. Portraits lined the walls, their painted eyes following her every movement. She felt watched, judged, and accused by the painted faces. As she explored the mansion's depths, she found a room she had not expected, a shrine to Ezin. There, in the center, sat a loaf of bread that had turned to stone. Beneath it, a name was etched in the rock itself, Ezin. Ifeananya approached the stone loaf slowly, reverently. The moment her fingers touched it, the bread cracked, and a whisper emerged from within, "Free me." The voice was weak but desperate, filled with centuries of suffering. Ifeananya heard the entire story in that whisper, how Adewale had grown obsessed with wealth, how he had discovered an ancient magic, how he had sacrificed the one he loved to gain power. Ezin's spirit had been screaming ever since, trapped in the space between life and death. Horror and sorrow washed over Ifeananya, but she whispered a promise to Ezin, "I will set you free." In her final moments of clarity before being pulled back into the spirit world, Ezin manifested fully before Ifeananya. She was beautiful and tragic, her form flickering like a candle flame. She revealed the entire truth. 20 years ago, Adewale had discovered an ancient pact, a bargain with dark forces. He could bake bread filled with magic and power, but the magic required a price. Each loaf had to be marked with a soul, and the first soul to be marked would create the seal that kept all others bound. Adewale had chosen his wife. He had baked the bread, whispered the incantations, and watched as the magic consumed her. She became the seal, the binding force that kept all the other cursed loaves connected. The pact also forbade Adewale from entering his own house where she had died. That was why he stood outside, refusing to cross the threshold. His curse was written into the magic itself. Ezin faded as she spoke, and her final words were written in ash across the floor, the ritual recipe for reversal. Ifeananya memorized every symbol, every instruction. She finally understood what she had to do. Ifeananya brought the ash recipe to Ioka, and the priestess interpreted its meaning. The curse can only be reversed if the first victim's soul partakes of her own bread again, Ioka explained. But this bread must be baked with love and sacrifice, not with darkness. It must be done under moonlight, beside running water, with the bread seal destroyed. Ifeananya understood what this meant. She would have to bake a new loaf using ingredients of her own, her blood, her tears, her intentions. She gathered what she needed. But before she could begin, Adewale's men arrived at her workshop with torches. They seized her, beat her, and burned everything she owned. Her tools, her journals, her sacred items, all turned to ash. They warned her to abandon her quest or face death. Ifeananya escaped into the forest, carrying only the memory of the recipe and the stone loaf fragment. Her workshop was gone, but her determination remained unshaken. She had one final chance to end this curse, and she would not fail. Ifeananya ran through the forest, pursued by Adewale's shadow servants. Behind her, she heard their footsteps and their whispers. She clutched the bread seal shard and the stone loaf fragment close to her heart. As she ran, she noticed something alarming: the shard's runes were beginning to fade. This was a sign that time was running short. The curse was growing weaker, which meant it was also growing more dangerous, like a wounded animal fighting for survival. She reached the river just as dawn broke. The water was running high, fed by recent rains. Ifeananya collapsed on the riverbank, exhausted but alive. She looked at the shard in her hand. The runes were almost completely gone. She had perhaps one night left before the magic consumed everything, including her own soul. The river turned blood-red under the early morning light, as if responding to her desperation. Ifeananya closed her eyes and began to pray. That evening, as darkness fell, the entire village gathered at the river for the festival. Adewale arrived to bless the water, preparing to extend his curse to the river itself. But Ifeananya stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. She interrupted the ceremony and accused Adewale directly, telling the villagers everything: the missing children, the cursed bread, his sacrifice of Ezen. The crowd gasped in shock. Adewale's face twisted with rage. He moved toward Ifeananya, but then she held up the bread seal. It burned in her hand, its light spreading across the village like a beacon. The runes that had been fading suddenly flared brilliant gold. In that moment, Adewale's reflection in the water smiled, a smile separate from his face, revealing that his soul had been split between two forms. His human body and his spirit self had been divided by the curse. The villagers finally saw the truth. They finally understood that Adewale was not human. Courage mixed with disbelief filled the air. Ifeananya raised her voice and called upon the spirits for strength. Ifeananya had spent the afternoon preparing in secret. She had gathered the ingredients: flour made from sacred grain, salt from the earth, water from the river, and ashes from Ezen's shrine. She mixed them carefully, kneading the dough with her own hands. As she worked, tears fell from her eyes, soaking into the mixture. The tears were not from fear, but from compassion, for Ezen, for the village, for all the victims. As the bread rose in a borrowed oven, it began to glow with a soft blue light. The curse was reacting to the purity of her intentions. Ifeananya understood that this bread was more than just food, it was a weapon of love against darkness. She removed the loaf from the oven as the moon reached its zenith. The bread was perfect, glowing blue like starlight. She held it up, and the entire village fell silent. Adewale lunged toward her, his body transforming. Half his form became serpent, half remained human. His skin darkened, and his eyes turned to black voids. Fear and hope mingled in Ifeanyanya's heart as she prepared for the final confrontation. The ritual had to be performed precisely as Ioka had instructed. Ifeananya stood at the river's edge under the full moon, holding the glowing bread. Adewale, now fully transformed into a monstrous creature, circled her like a predator. But Ifeananya had learned the secret. The curse could not touch the person who acted with pure intention. She broke the bread into 2 pieces. One piece she threw into the river, where it floated on the water's surface. Adewale's reflection rose from the depths and reached toward the bread. As the reflection consumed it, it began to scream, a sound of such agony that the earth trembled. The curse was breaking. The reflection dissolved into countless souls, Tund, Ezen, and all the others who had been trapped. They rose toward the sky like fireflies, free at last. Adewale's physical form began to collapse. The serpent receded, the darkness faded. He fell to the ground, human again, but hollow and empty. The curse was broken. The village fell silent, then erupted in prayer and gratitude. But Ioka had warned that breaking a curse always demanded a price. As the last victim's souls ascended, Ifeananya felt something shift within herself. Her reflection in the river began to move independently, separating from her physical form. The reflection smiled sadly and stepped into the water, becoming one with the river. Ifeanyanya's reflection remained there, visible to anyone who looked, but separated from her forever. The sacrifice had been made. Ifeananya would never see her own reflection again. She would be a living reminder of the cost of breaking darkness. The bread seal dissolved into dust, scattering on the wind. Adewale lay on the ground, freed from his curse but forever broken, unable to speak or move. A bittersweet sorrow filled the village. They had been saved, but at a price. Ifeananya looked at her hands, knowing what she had lost but accepting it willingly. She had freed Ezen's spirit. She had saved the village. That was enough. Years passed, and the village was rebuilt on foundations of truth and honor. Adewale's mansion was transformed into a shrine of remembrance, a place where people came to remember the dangers of greed and the cost of darkness. Ifeananya lived the rest of her days in peace, never looking into mirrors or still water, content in the knowledge that her reflection lived in the river, guarding it against future curses. The bakery that once spread poison now stood empty, sealed forever. But one day, the baker's oven awakened again. New hands learned to bake, and a new loaf rose, ordinary bread, baked with pure ingredients and honest intentions. This bread nourished the village without hunger, brought joy without curse. The people learned that gifts from others are always infused with the maker's heart. If the heart is pure, the gift is pure. If the heart is dark, the gift carries poison. And so, my children, we remember this tale. We remember why the rich man refused to enter his house. It was not stubbornness or madness. It was a curse born from his own darkness, punishing him for sacrificing love on the altar of wealth. Let this story teach you, character is the only true wealth, and kindness is the only magic worth keeping. Hope you love the story.